You are now watching the NeuroEngineering podcast for leaders with Veli Ndaba, the NeuroEngineer, where we have interesting conversations with thought leaders, transforming leaders from leadership darkness to leadership light. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share this episode.
Hi, my name is Veli Ndaba, the NeuroEngineer. I'm all about transforming minds from mental darkness to mental light. This is, of course, the NeuroEngineering podcast for leaders, where we are transforming leaders from leadership darkness to leadership light. And this is something exciting because we are using neuroscience latest discoveries to help explain and make sense of the human behavior. Because if you don't understand how humans behave, then it becomes very difficult to influence them, especially as a leader. So it's very important that as a leader you understand how you work and how other people as well are impacted by your behavior, because that is what is called influence. You want to influence people the right way rather than just winging it and just hoping that people are going to learn the best things. And today, I'm just so excited once again to be joined by one of our guests who is very, very sharp when it comes to issues of, the mind, when it comes to issues of leadership, and when it comes to leading people, because she's been doing that for quite a while. And her name is Shervarni Govender. And Shervarni is going to introduce herself. Good morning, Shervarni.
Good morning, Veli. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. I know that we are supposed to have had this, this chat between the two of us, but things have been happening. Yes. And I'm glad that finally is here.
Thank you.
Yes. Are you well this morning?
Very good. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. Shervarni, to our listeners and to our viewers, please introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Yes. So my name is Shervarni Govender. Someone who has the privilege of taking care of a team, serving on an exco. I work for LegalWise and Lisa as the executive officer for people and culture. And I've also started my own practice a few years ago in terms of coaching and leadership development, because that's really where my passion lies. So that's me.
Wow, thank you. And how long have you been with LegalWise for now?
So in a few months, it'll actually be 10 years.
Wow. So now we're talking from a place of experience and a place of knowledge. It's not just something that you've just started, that you're still trying to find, way through it, but it's something that you've actually established yourself. I mean, a decade is not just a short time. I mean, that's something you've earned your rights to talk about this. Thank you very much, Shervarni. And like Bob Proctor said, the only competition you'll ever have in your life is with your own ignorance. Because why? When you know better, you have an opportunity to do better. And I'm saying you have an opportunity to do better because there are many people who know better, but they don't do better.
Yes.
So knowing better does not equally translate into doing better. It's about knowing better, having an opportunity to do better. So if you know better but you don't do better, it's very unfortunate that that's something that happens. These are people who will talk about all the beautiful things, but they don't do them. Those things don't translate into something that we can all see and aspire to. So, and I think as we look at that, I just want to find out from you. I mean, getting into leadership, how was your upbringing for you? What were you seeing around as you were growing up? What influenced you maybe to say to yourself one day, I want to be a leader? What was happening in you? How did you grow up? What did you see around you?
Oh, lovely question. And I think that speaks so much to our journeys when we understand why certain experiences, especially in our childhood, would have shaped certain worldviews that we hold. And I think from my perspective, to give a bit of background, I grew up in a family of 4 siblings. So we were 4 children, both parents. Around a grandmother who came every 6 months, like in some of our more traditional homes, came and stayed with us too. My mom was a homemaker, my dad worked, and it was an upbringing of great human connection. Lots of family, lots of friends, in and out of neighbors' homes. It was back in the day when children played on the streets and they did hide and seek until 7, 8 o'clock when their parents forced them to come in on a Friday or Saturday night. So very safe, very secure, maybe also somewhat conservative upbringing that I've had. However, the one thing I will say that I've learned through the years that was maybe unique in mine is that even though I grew up in a very traditional Indian home,
Yes.
as an Indian child, as an Indian girl child, I always had a voice. So my father always encouraged that regardless of whatever society says about who we need to be, as girl children, and I'm the oldest of two sisters, and I've got two older brothers, one has passed away, that we need to be able to be assertive, make our own money, learn what it is to be in life, to be independent. And that started in the home. So dinner table, you had an opinion. In fact, I think my father was surprised when I studied what I studied because they always thought I would go the law route. I'd become the lawyer because I was the lawyer of the family. So I think given that I had a very loving home, it became quite challenging in my matric year when all of that was disrupted. And it was disrupted because my mom passed away. A day after my last matric exam, in my arms at the little company of Mary Hospital, and it was due to cancer. And so that matric year, as someone who considered themselves to be academically above average, wanted good grades, I found myself not studying much in that year, spending lots of time at her bedside, taking care of her, administering the morphine, and then knowing that the responsibility of my family would be on my shoulders. Yeah. Being the oldest girl child, knowing that my mom had asked me to make sure that I don't leave the country, I stay, because she knew I had aspirations. I had aspirations to go and do all kinds of great, amazing things. And we had a conversation one night, and she said to me, I really hope that you're going to take care of your sister and you're going to stay. And I said, Mom, of course I am, but what are you asking? And she said, well, my time is coming. So we had these conversations, Veli, which so many children and so many people don't have an opportunity to have. We had the conversations about death. And I said to her, I will be there. I will do what you need me to do. And when the time comes, the right opportunities will present themselves. But that's not something she needs to worry about. Because at that moment, I recognized that for her, leaving her children, leaving her family, someone who had prided herself in being a good mom and a good wife, to know that that would now end and what would happen was by far her biggest fear. And one of the things maybe we'll get to is the Enneagram, because I'm a real lover of the Enneagram framework. And in understanding that, I knew that for my mom, for her, what her legacy would be her children.
Yes.
Would be what she left behind in her community. And for me, it was important to take that on. So that led me then to almost growing up faster than what I thought I would, in that everyone was partying in the matric year, and I was trying to figure out how do I cook and how am I going to juggle all my lectures and an academic degree that I was starting the next year versus what I was going to do on the home front. But then it led me on to great opportunities, because there's one thing that life does when you're forced in a situation like that. You really cultivate resilience. You got to figure out how you're going to navigate life, knowing that probably the most important person that you needed is not going to be there. And then reshaping as a young woman what it means to now venture into this world in a way that still takes on the responsibility of the family, but also can chart your own path.
Wow.
So yes.
I really love that. I mean, it's such a beautiful background. And I'm just, keen on just finding out from you. When you look at things like, like how we raise our children, we love our children so much, and we say we don't want them to grow up the way we grew up, because they need to be much stronger, they need to have most of the things that we didn't have. But how do you draw a line of distinction between that and resilience? Because I think how you've captured it, it's something that came out beautifully in terms of when you say to children, I love you so much and I'm going to take care of you. But where do you draw a line as a parent, a line of distinction between spoiling them and making them resilient people, because it's something that you don't learn from school, but it's something that you experience as you grow through. What did you say maybe as parents, or most parents miss out when it comes to that? Where do we cross the line between loving our kids so much that we steal resilience from them?
So I'm a mother too, to an 11-year-old son who's going on 16, because I feel like the teenage years start earlier these days than what they used to.
Absolutely.
And I will say that some of the work done by Dr. Shifali Tabari on conscious parenting has revolutionized how I see the world of what it means to be a parent. And the reason for that is she speaks of how, as parents, we need to first make peace with our own upbringing, our own demons, so that we don't pass them on to our children. And I think that's the same thing that translates into leadership. When you can understand yourself, when you can understand what your triggers are, why it is that you do the things you do, what are the beliefs that I hold as a human? Are those beliefs actually serving me? Are some of them based on untrue assumptions? Should I be questioning why I do what I do, so that I don't end up either hearing my mother or my father speak out of my mouth? Because I know we've often said that as children. I remember this. I'm never going to do what my mother just did. I'm never going to do what my father just did. I will never be that person. And then one day something bad happens and you hear your mother coming out of your mouth. Or you hear your father and you're like, oh, why? Why did I get there?
Yeah.
So I think it's that personal mastery work as parents that we have to do first on ourselves. And then to really understand who our children are, because they are sovereign beings.
Yeah,
you know, as they've been said in so many beautiful literature, our children come through us, but they are not owned by us. We provide an environment, we provide a space for them to become their own unique, sovereign, independent beings. But we also affect that world greatly, because we know when we engage in therapy, when we engage in leadership development, when we start to look at coaching, sometimes certain things, when we go back to our childhood, started at that point and we live them out as real lived experiences again in the worlds that we operate in, whether parents or whether leaders. And I think it's unpacking that and understanding it and confronting maybe some of those difficult situations and how we've maybe perceived them, made meaning out of them, is the only way that we can start to transform and not do or repeat the same mistakes of our past. And I'm sure you've seen it too, Veli, where history repeats itself. You know, a child growing up in a broken home ends up marrying a partner that's abusive and then ends up having a broken home in their own space. A mother who gave birth to a child long before she intended to, maybe in her school years, ends up having a child who does the exact same thing. And it's this pattern of repeating, because I think we don't break the cycle. Absolutely. And we don't ask those incisive questions about ourselves in order to confront what would have happened so we don't repeat the same mistakes.
You know, I love that. And the other thing that I just want to check as well, you know, when you look at these things happening, I've never heard of you know, someone or anyone saying, let's come up with, you know, a parenting guide. Mm-hmm. Or a course. I mean, like if you go for, you know, to drive a car, you need to have a driver's license. You know, when you have to pass your matric to go to university, you need to have a matric certificate. You need, but for parenthood, it seems like, you know, we're just hoping that things are going to turn out because you are a parent. And do you think sometimes it's something that comes to my mind to say, the world is not even looking at that to say, how can we develop parents? So that people can know how to deal with this thing of parenting, just at least to have some guidelines. Do you think that can help?
I think more so ever than before, because this story of people saying it just happened, it was a mistake, I think we must be honest.
Yes.
With the amount of contraception there is out there, there's no mistakes anymore,
Absolutely.
right? So being intentional about being a parent, I think, is a conscious decision.
Absolutely.
I don't think it's something that just happens. And I think in that journey of deciding, first of all, that you want to become a parent, some of that work needs to start, even before the child is born.
Yes.
In terms of dealing with what it is and who you want to be. I mean, do we even set an intention around, this is the kind of mother or father I want to be, or this is what I want to leave behind? We often talk about it in the world of work. This is my legacy. This is my purpose. This is the difference I want to make. But as parents, do we ask ourselves those questions before the child is born, or even when the child is born and the self-awareness kicks in? Do we ask those questions about who it is that I want to be? And I think that parent-child relationship goes both ways. Yeah. I think as much as we are influencing, our children are shaping us into the humans that we are. And I think when we recognize that, we can start to see the beauty that exists between a parent and child relationship, that you both are growing. that you both are learning, that you both are figuring out things, because it is a journey. It's a moment of connection as opposed to a moment of perfection.
Fantastic. And now coming back to this issue of you choosing, you got trained as a psychologist as well. You are in human resources. I mean, you are a senior person and an executive officer when it comes to people and culture, at Legal Wise. What actually led you into human resources and psychology as well?
So the interesting thing, Veli, is that what I studied is not what I do. I actually have a BSc degree in human genetics, human physiology, and psychology. So
fantastic. Fantastic stuff.
So yes, so I actually don't have an HR degree, an industrial psychology degree. I don't. Where I started was, my plan initially was to actually become a medical doctor.
Yes.
Because like a lot of Indian children, you either became an accountant, a lawyer, or a doctor.
you
right?
said it. I didn't
Absolutely,
say it.
and I can say it, right? So, so that was like what happened. And if you were really the outspoken child, okay, we'll accept that you're a lawyer. Yeah. That's fine. So of course, those were the opportunities that were presented, and I looked at them and I thought, okay, MBCHB is the way to go. I've got good grades, and it was that matric year. And that is why it was so significant, that I realized that the difference I was going to make was not going to be in the medical field, because I saw what had happened in my mother's experience. It was very clinical. It was very focused on just keeping her alive. It wasn't about the quality of life.
Sure.
Doctors never engaged on what's happening at home. How are you guys making peace with the fact that she's got stage 4 cancer? Doctors spoke about what's the next chemotherapy? When are we going to do radiation? It was all about preserving the life, but not the quality of the life. And that's when I realized that I wanted to make a difference more in the quality of life, because we don't know when our last day is going to be on this earth. But we need to live it to the best of our ability with whatever God has given us, whatever the universe has given us, no matter what your faith is. And so when I went in with my father to the University of Pretoria to say I'm changing my degree to psychology, we met with, and I think these things happen not by chance, eh?
True.
We met with an amazing counselor who said to me, I'd like you to still stay for 6 months with the medical degree, because the first 6 months are exactly the same as your MBCHB versus your BSc degree.
Yes.
Stay there and make an informed decision after 6 months, because if you still want to transition into becoming a medical doctor, you're not going to be held back.
Yeah.
And I said to her, okay, this degree looks good because you've added psychology as a third major. That is where I still think I want to be, but let's do this. Yeah. And it worked out to be the best thing, because it offered me a background in neuroscience, it offered me a background in human physiology, what happens to our body under stress, and I got the psychology background. And I decided after 6 months, I knew already that I wasn't going to go the medical route, I was going to go the psychology route. However, when I finished my degree, and of course I needed to start working because I studied on a NSFAS agreement, and I will say that a month before, hand on heart, a month before I got married, I paid off my NSFAS loan. I know there are lots of people who still owe our government, and that is not okay. I paid off my NSFAS agreement.
Call them out, Shervarni. Call them out. Yeah.
Because it was a gift. It was a gift to go and study with a 40% bursary.
Sure.
It was a gift, and you have to honor that commitment. Wow. So I decided after my degree, you know what, I need to work, because I can't keep on racking up all this debt here. And I've got siblings, a sister who needed to still study, and, with dad with his only single income, and all the medical bills that were still to be paid, even after my mom had passed away. I was very privileged because I received an opportunity at Momentum.
Wow.
And they offered me an internship to pay for my honors in psychology and to work in their assessment center. And that's where I got into the world of corporate. So from a BSc Genetics, Physiology and Psychology degree, I entered the world of financial services. I did my psychometric internship with them. I got my honors with Momentum. And the next logical step from psychometrics was to move into HR. But I didn't have an HR background. But I met amazing people along my journey who I formed relationships with, who saw the potential in me and wanted to give me an opportunity. So I jumped from HR administrator, junior HR consultant to HR consultant. But it didn't come with pain. Veli, we know there are some people who find that if people are given certain opportunities, they must still drag them down.
Yes.
They must still hold on to them.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Like, why were you so lucky?
Yeah.
And so there were challenges there where there were senior individuals who felt I didn't deserve the opportunity.
Sure.
But I had people in my corner, leaders who did. And that was also a good opportunity to test your character, because when you're having to defend why you're the right person, why you bring competence and capability, and why you are hungry to learn, you also learn a great degree of humility. So that's how I ended up in HR. It chose me. I didn't quite choose it.
Wow. And I love it. Whenever we say things chose us, we didn't choose them, that's when you become the best in what you do, because it's not something that you chase, but it's something that has been forever chasing you. So many people are running away, from things that are chasing them. I mean, which is a pity. That's something. And now just talking about that. Now, in your role now, as an executive, looking at people and culture, what does your day look like? What does your typical day look like? If we just to talk about that, just to give someone a picture of that, to say, my typical day looks like this.
Yes, absolutely. So I have a 21 team that I look after under people and culture, and that's made up of the usual transactional HR. So that's like payroll, recruitment, selection, and then there's L&D, which is part of my portfolio too. So learning and development sits with me. And then I'm also responsible for internal communications, employee engagement, and corporate social investment.
Yes.
So those are all the entire HR value chain, so to speak, from recruitment all the way up to exit and everything in between, from talent management, succession planning, and so on. My day, because I serve on 2 ExCos, I have 2 CEOs that I'm accountable to. I'm also accountable to a group CEO. So yes, I have many masters to serve. It involves quite a few meetings, especially meetings that involve strategy development, tactical operations, how are we tracking with all of our initiatives, campaigns that we're running. I also look after 3 business partners, so I'm involved in whatever support they need, whether it is consultation on an IR matter or they're dealing with a recruitment decision that needs my input, so I work very closely with them. And then, of course, it's the learning and development team that is responsible for all the training. So I would rather say in terms of a week, I have contact sessions with each of my direct reports once a week, at least.
At least.
Right? Then there's a team meeting that happens also every second week, but we get together as and when we need to. We're very active on WhatsApp, so I will constantly be answering queries or helping someone with a decision on that. I have an ExCo meeting every month, but I have a legal-wise ExCo check-in every Monday. So I'm also involved in working with my peers who are responsible for different portfolios under our CEO. And then there's all the reporting that goes with being in an exec role, whether it is BBE, SECO, which is our Social and Ethics Committee, whether it is ExCo itself, certain management committee meetings, I'm involved in those. And then there's the financial aspect, managing a budget. Managing a new or a deep business need that has come up that now needs a different way of looking at it, looking at our roadmap and making sure that we're tracking well with what we've said we want to achieve. So it's a high people contact role,
Yes.
very high people contact, and I have an amazing team. I have people I've worked with for years. I was privileged that I got to recruit some of them. So I got to choose who I wanted to be part of my team. Some people I brought from my previous company who were like, we're following you, we're coming with you, and
Wow,
we've been able to continue the journey. So very high people contact, but it is very much involved in understanding the finances and where the business is going. So you've got to keep that in mind, looking at what's happening in our country and being aware of that, because you need to anticipate the risks that are potentially going to affect us,
Yes.
especially given what we serve in terms of our members and who we stand for as a business. And then it's also the investment in the team itself, because you're only as strong as your team is. And you're only as good as the level of skill and capability that they have and how okay they are. Because we bring our whole selves to work.
Yeah.
Whether you've had a fight with a partner at home, whether your child is ill, you bring all of that in. And as a leader, you need to be aware of that. So I often say my life is an integration. Ryan, my son, knows that, it's Mommy is legal-wise, and she is mommy, and she's all of these things. The job doesn't stop at 5 o'clock.
Yes.
It doesn't. It's an integration.
And I just love that. And I just wanted to ask that question as well, because as a leader, do you really see other leaders integrating that or looking at that integration where they just look at a person holistically instead of just looking at them as a resource, to produce whatever needs to be produced? Do they actually look at where do you think things are missing in terms of that? Because that alone affects the mental well-being. And as a busy person, and because we've shared platforms, at conferences, and we met, and I said, I need to have you because people need to hear this story. And that's something, because I've seen you in action, whenever we talk about things and we engage and with those audiences. And I think what is more interesting is authenticity that comes out. So in terms of the mental well-being, how do you, and what do you do to ensure that you are mentally sound and your well-being is well taken care of, especially as a leader?
As cliched as it sounds, it starts with me. Yeah. And it starts with me in that, do I actually prioritize those things for myself? Because only when you give yourself that gift can you give it to everyone else.
Yes.
And do you recognize the importance of it? And that was a hard conversation I needed to have, especially when I became a mother and I wanted to continue in my leadership role, is that, am I going to prioritize exercise, some form of meditation or yoga that I would need to do? Am I taking care of my health? Am I eating the junk food or am I eating the healthy, good stuff? Simple things like breathing. I think we sometimes forget that we do this shallow breathing and how important it is to actually breathe deeper. Take those moments to pause, the time to think, in order to process whatever is happening. I think if we don't create those, and we've got fantastic leaders and authors who have shared with us fantastic tools that we can use. Robin Sharma with the 5 a.m. Club.
Yes.
Fantastic framework that you can actually practically apply, and it works. I know this because I've tried it.
Yes.
So there are great frameworks that I think as leaders we have to first lead by example. We need to do it. They say our children don't do as they told, they do as we do, right? They watch us, they mimic us. We see it. So our teams would do the same thing. So I think when we respect our leave and our time off, when we respect our dinner time or evening time with our families and not invade that in terms of contacting team members outside of that. I understand in exceptional situations, but I've seen leaders who invade that time, that violate that time. And it's so important that we recognize that as human beings, you need to have downtime from work. You need to be able to attend your kids' soccer match.
Yes.
Because that's important. It makes you a whole person. And when they come back to the world of work, they're better because they've sorted that out.
Yes.
So I think it starts with us. It starts with us prioritizing it.
And as you're talking about that, the importance of work-life balance. We're talking neuroscience. We're talking stuff with you, like psychology and whatever. We understand the brain much better than most people do. And when you talk about work-life balance, what comes to mind? Because I think there's a misconception between, when people talk about work-life balance and mastery. Because mastery does not work on, on that arrangement of just work-life balance. But what's your understanding in terms of what must be happening when you're not at work? Because I find that we end up engaging in things like, social media a lot, which really ends up triggering something. There's a phenomenon called social media depression. Because we are scrolling those screens, we are comparing ourselves. It means those things are triggering stress. They actually plunge people to depression. And for you, what did you say works? When people talk about work-life balance, is it just a way of running away from work? Or is it a way as well of just trying to ensure that we are able to think of ourselves and disconnect to reconnect? What did you say? What's your understanding of work-life balance? Because I know that there are different connotations, and definitions and how people look at it.
So I love the concept of work-life integration.
Yes.
Because I think we need to see work as part of our life and not a separate thing altogether.
Yes.
Firstly. Then I think the social media craze, and I have elected not to be on Facebook. I don't even look at Twitter. And maybe I'll be shot as a leader for saying these kind of things. But what I find and what I've experienced is that it's a rabbit hole. Scrolling addiction is a real thing. We're seeing it in our schools, we're seeing it in universities, we're seeing it in malls. I don't know how many times you've noticed people walking, and it's almost as if their phone is an extension of their hand. They can't take their eyes off it, you know, it's like a part of them. How many people have you seen sitting at restaurants and they're sitting, maybe it's even date night, and they're meant to be connecting, and they're sitting on their phones. That's what they're doing. So for me, screen time is a huge issue, huge issue. And I think as parents, as leaders, as adults in the society that we're in, we need to display the kind of behavior we want our children to display. Yes. So having that downtime is important. You spoke about something very important about this work-life integration and how you do it in the downtime. Yeah. I think we need to ask ourselves, what do we do to shut off? Yeah. If your shutting off is to go onto Instagram, then that is not an effective mechanism. Because what is posted on social media? All the good stuff. How people are having an amazing time, what they've achieved. We're seeing and are being punted with all of what is good in life. So of course depression is going to set in, because when you put your life up against what we're seeing happening on social media, you're coming up short.
Absolutely.
Because your life is a real experience, whereas on social media it is not a real authentic look at what life is really like. It's all the good stuff. Yeah. And that's when things like body shaming starts. I'm not light-skinned enough. I don't have the right hair. I'm not in the right shape. Because let's face it, a lot of our girls and boys are going through that in schools.
True.
And then there's this whole thing around women in particular, where this woman's got it all. You know, she's got the fancy clothes, the great career. But do anyone ever ask what happens at night? Is she on medication? How is she coping with the stresses of life? We don't talk about those things.
She flies business class.
Absolutely. You know?
If she flies, or maybe private jet.
Yes. But we're not talking about the real stuff, about what it is like for all of the rest of the world, because that could be a small niche that gets to enjoy that. But the rest of us that are in the trenches here, it's a very different reality. So I think having the right kind of coping mechanisms is very important. Watching what we consume. I mean, let's think about it, right? We choose what we put into our bodies. Yes. But why do we not make conscious choices about what we put into our minds? The kind of things we consume on Netflix, those people who, and we have them in our lives, who binge watch a series over the whole weekend. Yeah. And it hasn't contributed to your growth. It hasn't helped you improve in terms of your learning or your understanding, or just having no time to do anything and enjoy the environment.
And then that's exactly the point I was getting to. Just, you know, that way to say, because when people talk about work-life balance, we're talking about work-life integration. When you're not at work, what exactly? Yes, I mean, people talk about family time. And I ask them, you know, in like different places, when you talk about family time, what does it mean? Does it mean being at home with your kids running around, with your partner sitting next to you, with your phones, you know, scrolling your phones and whatever? That's what it's called, family time. But what exactly do you do to improve yourself? What do you do to disconnect from, you know, the happenings of life, so that at least you are dealing with stress and anxiety and things like that? No, instead you are binge watching those things. Yes. Instead you are bringing a lot of them. There's something that we call also in neuroscience called the scroll and compare syndrome, because we are social creatures. Yes. So whenever you look at other people, you pit yourself, I mean, because it's like a totem pole of life, to say, where am I on this totem pole of life? And always people on social media, they post their best selves. You know, it's most of the stuff is photoshopped.
Yes. Yes, there's lovely screens.
I tell lovely screens and everything is like they've got it all. Yes. But when you look at yourself, you compare yourself with those people, you come short all the time. And now every time you come short, it takes something away from you. It takes something in terms of your cognition. Your cognitive abilities, they go down because you start to say, I'm less than. You know, like you feel bad. You feel, and there's no reason to be doing that. So self-confidence at the same time must be very important for you. So that's the reason why we bring in, you know, psychologists, neuroscience, to understand the impact of your behavior. Because when you go on social media, it's not just to have fun. No. But you will see people who are better than you. You will see someone who has something you don't have. And that makes you feel less than.
Yes.
And it's got a negative, I mean, like, impact on how you turn out as a person.
Absolutely. And that's where that self-doubt sets in, and the anxiety, and I'm not where I'm supposed to be, and this constant measuring, as opposed to the internal locus of control, like they talk about in psychology.
Yes.
We've kind of lost that. It's become very much externalized. External validation, external recognition, how many likes you get, how popular you are, what you're wearing. It's all concerned with this external. Whereas internally, we've lost sense of what it is to have that locus of control that says, I'm okay. Stephen Covey talks about that circle of control, that circle of influence, and that circle of concern, and how important it is to cultivate that in our children, in our teams, so that we can be a far more resilient society, population, world than what we currently find. So that these addictions like alcohol, drugs, medication, all kinds of other behaviors that we're starting to see more and more and more come up, we can mitigate that because there's this reliance on inner self.
Absolutely. And Ian Gray said, we do not choose our futures, but we choose our habits. And our habits decide our futures. And every day, whenever you are becoming more stressed, because that's exactly what happens when you spend more time on social media, just numbing yourself with all these beautiful things that you watch, or things, the movies that you see every day. And I say to myself, where do you get all the time to look at that? I mean, because when you do great things, like we're writing books, people say, but where do you get the time to do all these things? But the question is, where do you get all the time to be watching TV, to be on social media and whatever? Time is there. It's a question of how do we use that time.
Absolutely.
And your take, do you really think that leaders are able to use their time well? Because there's something that you mentioned as well that I normally talk about, the law of the lead. The law of the lead states that if you are a port, how big you are as a port will determine the capacity of your team. Because if you are not capacitated as a leader, it means your team is not going to be capacitated. Because whenever they challenge you, you'll take it personally. Because why? You don't have the answers. You are very limited. So as a leader, when you develop yourself, then you allow your team members as well to develop, because you are more. You cannot get more if you are less. You've got to be more. So for you, what do you think is happening with leaders? Do you think they're taking good care of their well-being? I'm talking about the mental well-being, the physical well-being, and other spiritual well-being. Because as a leader, you need to be the guide. So are you showing them, are you a good example as a leader if you are not able to take care of yourself?
Absolutely not. And I think a lot of leaders have fallen into the trap of doing things the same way, because it's gotten them those certain results.
Yes.
And those certain results speak to profitability, bottom line, getting as much as what you can. That whole concept of drawing all that you can, sweating the assets. And the problem with that is eventually the assets,
sweating the assets,
they become stones, and we know you can't draw blood from a stone because you've taken, you've not given. And it's the same thing that happens in our own lives. If we don't give within, if we don't take a moment and ask ourselves, given where the world is going, given all the instability, given the uncertainty, the ambiguity, what's happening in America, what's happening in all of these countries that are at war with each other, if we don't stop and ask ourselves the question of, is what I'm doing right now going to serve me into the future? And pause and really be reflective. I think we're heading down a very downward spiral. I don't think leaders are doing enough of that. I don't think they're giving themselves time to think. I have found Nancy Klein's work on time to think to be most impactful, where we take time to pause and ask ourselves some incisive questions about where we're at. And I think, as you've said, we are creatures of habits. If you don't build that into your monthly, quarterly reviews, we end up moving in a direction that we're so far from where the goalpost is, that now the burnout sets in, the anxiety, the depression. We start to hate our jobs. I often talk about the carte blanche test. And it was the carte blanche music, or the 50-50 music back in the day that used to come on a Sunday night.
Yes.
And depending on what your emotional state is in that moment, tells you how you feel about your job, far more than any pulse survey or engagement survey. Because if you feel trepidation when you hear the carte blanche music, because Monday is coming, you know there's a problem as a leader.
Absolutely.
It means that thing that you are spending so much of time doing is not bringing you joy, is not bringing you meaning. If you're not excited about it, it's time to pause and reflect. And I don't think as leaders we do that, because we're slaves to our salaries. We're slaves to everything that we've built as a lifestyle with what we've been gaining. And so I think that moment to stop and to reflect and to ask ourselves those important questions about where's my team at, where am I at? What is our current health beyond what we're delivering to business? What is our current health in this moment? And do we have a dipstick of that? And what do we need to change? Do we need to have less meetings and have more effective meetings? I mean, I don't know how many times, and it's something I've started in the organization, that you have to have an agenda and the right people need to be in that room, because so often people attend a meeting and say nothing. And it could have been a memo. It could have been an email. Instead of it having been 2 hours of their time spent sitting there for someone to have a monologue. We need to change how we do work. We need to change how we engage. We need to ask ourselves if this is really the most important priority for us to do now in this moment, given that we've got limited time that we have at our disposal. One of the most important things I learned in Time to Think was you have not arrived until your voice is heard.
Yeah.
And I think it is such a profound statement, because how often do we sit in engagement or sessions or workshops, long day stuff, exco meetings, and nothing is said, or too much is said that doesn't actually change. So I think changing how we do work, asking ourselves the questions about our own mental health, our own well-being as leaders is vital, and I think the time for that is now.
Absolutely. And do you really think many leaders understand their influence or their impact to their teams?
No.
Because that's something that I just need to be asking, I mean, also based on what you're saying, to say, do you really think that they lack that self-awareness and they lack, that understanding and insight in terms of the impact that they have on their teams?
I don't. And I read something very interesting. They said that next to your relationship with your partner, whether it's your husband or wife, spouse, or just your boyfriend or girlfriend or your partner, next to that significant relationship is the relationship with your manager, your direct manager.
Yes.
It is that important.
Sure.
It is that significant.
Wow.
Research has told us, because you're spending so much of time with this person, reporting to this person, answering to this person, collaborating with this person. So I don't think leaders recognize the true impact that they have on their teams, how much responsibility comes with taking care and serving a team, how we can make or break a person in the words that we use, in how we relate to them, in not seeing them, in not asking, how are you, and not just waiting for a fine, how are you, but really asking that question, in seeing people for who they are. I don't think leaders recognize the responsibility that has been bestowed on them to do it.
Yeah. And Theodore Roosevelt said, human nature is the most important subject to understand if you truly want to be an effective leader. When you hear of someone called an effective leader, what comes to mind to you as Shervarni, and say, an effective leader for me or to me is a person like this? What sort of characteristics and sort of like skills that a person is to have to be an effective leader? Because to be an effective person and to be an effective parent, you need to be having something that's different from other people. What did you say for you works, or maybe comes as sort of characteristics of someone who is an effective leader?
Oh, it's such a beautiful question, Veli. I think it first starts with recognizing that in order to be an effective leader, and the ones that I've observed to be effective leaders, are those who are committed to their own personal growth first. And yeah, I'm not talking about financial gain and possessions and status and how high up you are. I'm talking about personal mastery, where you're willing to work with yourself first. Understand those triggers, understand those demons we've been carrying, understand those limiting beliefs. I think it starts there. Then I think some of the traits and characteristics of an effective leader is someone who recognizes that they are the moral compass of an organization. Ethical leadership is a dearth in South Africa at the moment. It is lacking across institutions, across sectors. It's even in our most important infrastructures like hospitals and the police force. I had a recent experience of corruption in a police station, which was awful. I won't even go into that because you and I will need a therapy session for that.
And maybe just on that one, I mean, just before we continue just unpacking that, maybe to our viewers or for our listeners, How to define ethical leadership so that at least we don't leave them behind, Yes.
I think that there are very clear moral standards.
Yes.
It's not an interpretation. I think we know what is right and wrong.
Yes.
We have enough as a society developed rules and regulations. You know when you're doing something wrong and when you're cutting a corner.
Yes.
And you know when you are doing something right. And I think it's not something that is purely subjective.
Yes.
I think there are perfectly well formulated guidelines and rules in our very beautiful constitution, because we have one of the most progressive constitutions in the world. I think our corporate governance structures, from what we do in terms of the Companies Act to the Prudential Authority, if I'm talking specifically in the financial sector, guides our behavior. We've got what we need to know what is right or wrong. The problem is, as human beings, we rationalize our behavior. We make excuses. And we allow emotions instead of the logical brain to help us make decisions.
Yes.
Because we've been still healing from our afflictions of our past that we bring with us, that we develop the sense of entitlement or power that brings us to the point where unethical decisions are made or unethical behavior is resulted in it, and no one holds us to task.
Yes.
We don't have enough consequence management to teach people to stop and to say, if you continue down this path, this is what the consequences are going to be. We don't do that. We don't do it. So I think ethical leadership is far less a subjective construct. I think it can be a very objective thing that says, because we know it. We feel it. If we just listen to our bodies, we know when we've said something that we maybe shouldn't have, or we've done something we shouldn't have. And we see it in our children. You know when your child is lying to you, because they have certain things that they do. We know it, and they know it. I think it's in getting honest about it, talking about what ethical leadership means, asking yourself as an organization, not just the stuff we have in paper, but how do we treat each other? Because that is a big part of ethical leadership too. Who are the favorites? Are we willing to discuss those? Why do certain people get away with it? Are we willing to have those conversations?
Because that comes to that question again, to say, why is it, I'm sure you've noticed that, why is it that you've got toxic people getting more promotions? I deal a lot, with these issues, in organizations. If you ask them and say, but who is a toxic person here? Everyone will tell you. That's the thing. But those people keep on getting promoted. And you wonder and say, but why is that? Why do you think? Is it an issue around failure when you look at things like ethical leadership? Because those people are promoted by certain individuals. Why do you think that's the case?
I think it's always important to ask what is the desired goal or outcome of those individuals who are making those decisions.
Absolutely.
Is it to look good? Is it to save reputation? And I think what's becoming more and more prevalent is this narcissistic personality disorder in the workplace, where it's about me, I. And I think as much as people at the top, and there are some excellent boards that really ask themselves these hard questions, but there are also some that are all about the money and the gain. And so whoever's going to get them that gets the promotion.
Yes.
Whoever's going to sweat the asset is going to get the promotion. And sometimes it is a sale at any cost. And I think that's when, as human beings, we are failing.
Very true. And that obviously affects creativity. And as a leader, Shervarni, you've been around, you've been there and doing these things. How do you inculcate a culture of creativity in the workplace? How do you develop that kind of culture where people can come up with some sort of like thinking abilities, where people can think creatively? Because there are two things to this leadership. Either you are developing order takers or you are developing creative thinkers. So in the workplace, you find that a lot is happening around order takers, where you do as I tell you. People don't think anymore because leaders don't encourage that culture. They don't inculcate that. So in your case, how do you encourage that kind of thinking, moving away from order taking, perspective to creative thinking perspective? Because we want people who are able to think. But if as a leader, and I think those two are a reflection of a leader. Because if you don't want to be challenged, because you lack self-confidence, you lack that self-development, because you may be spending too much time on social media and whatever when you are supposed to be developing yourself. What did you say around that? You know, how do you work around that sort of like, you know, area of developing, you know, your team?
I think there's a disconnect between how leaders view innovation and creative thinking and their need for control. So what ends up happening is we preach we want innovation, we want creative thinking, we want new ideas, but we don't create an environment for that to happen. We create an environment where there's performance contracts that speak to how many workflows you take. Did you meet your budget? Did you come in under? How many inefficiencies did you resolve? And so on. Now those are great. I'm not saying they don't have a place.
Yes.
But if they are not couched in an environment where people are given an opportunity to think for themselves, and with that as leaders, we need to be so comfortable to recognize that when we give that power, when we empower people to think for themselves, we need to be secure in ourselves to know that we are going to be questioned and challenged. Because only great ideas come when we challenge the status quo, when we ask the difficult questions. If we don't empower people to think for themselves, so and I'll give you an example. Someone comes here as a leader and says, I'm sitting with this problem, what do you think I should do? Our natural state is to give advice and to tell them what to do, because then we feel good about ourselves because we gave them a solution, because we already knew the solution.
Yes.
At any point did we ask them, what do you think? And I know it takes longer, it's more time, you have to invest. You're not going to get to the solution immediately. But what that does is it teaches people to think first before they just come and ask for advice. To have a thinking session to say, I'm going to keep quiet as a leader, because maybe even I think that's the solution, but the problem that's been presented may not have even been the problem at the onset. So let's think about it together. I think when we empower people to think for themselves first, which schools have really dumbed down, which universities have dumbed down, which the world of work has. When we start to change that unlearning of having your own mind, because we all have it, really, we have these beautiful minds that we've been given with this incredible ability to question and to think. And that is why children ask us so many questions. But why, mommy? But why, mommy? And then eventually we know that we get to that point where like, actually, I don't know. We'll have to ask Google. But children are born with that. And throughout life, we've taught them to take that away. Give me what is in the demarcation and in the test. If you do that, you get an A. Same thing at work. So I think, firstly, to cultivate innovation and creativity, we have to create a thinking environment.
Yes.
We have to create an environment where people feel psychologically safe to think, to make mistakes, to have stupid questions asked.
Yes.
I don't know how many times my team members, I've had to say to them, there's no stupid question. But it's become part of our vocabulary to say, I have a stupid question. You've already labeled it as stupid. It's not. So I think to create an environment for psychological safety, for questioning, for thinking, only then can you expect people to unlearn what they've been taught, to behave like little robots and do what they do well, to unlearn that, and then you can move towards innovation and creativity. Because innovation and creativity does not have bounds, doesn't have color in according to this. It requires us to think differently, to explore something from a different perspective. And I think that is why the great leaders who have been innovative. I have very strong views about Elon Musk. I read his biography.
Yeah.
I think he's a brilliant leader in terms of creativity. I don't think he's a great person who treats people well. But I think what he has taught us is that genius mindsets can be cultivated when you push the boundaries and you question.
True.
However, there's a lot to be desired in terms of how he relates to people and manages them and treats them. But I think that is what is missing, is that we don't have this courage to ask the difficult. Why have we been doing it for so long?
Yes, absolutely.
Can we change it? And as leaders, we need to be secure in ourselves to be okay with that. My mentor and coach, when I was very younger, said to me, why do we get surprised when a tiger tries to attack us? A tiger is doing what it does because it is a wild animal. You shouldn't be surprised. So if you are going to create and you want tigers in your team, you need to be prepared to take a swipe every now and then as a leader.
Hi, my name is Veli Ndaba, the NeuroEngineer. I help leaders understand themselves and their team members better by using the latest discoveries in neuroscience to help explain and make sense of the human behavior. This is what every leader needs, especially in this time of knowledge economy, where everything is all about using that knowledge, using the part of the brain that is responsible for cognition and for creativity. So how do we go about doing this? And this is what I unpack. So let's connect and unleash the power that this brain carries. This is just awesome. I just love that. And I've recently, as I facilitate workshops and do these things, I was asking some leaders to say, how do you inculcate the culture of creativity in your team? People were just looking. And I was saying, because the problem is, we are mostly having this notion that as leaders, we need to be to be right all the time. We need to give right answers. We need to be seen as having all the answers, which is very unfortunate. And naturally, like you've just indicated as well, to say, you're so quick to give an advice, but you don't solicit, some views from people to say, but what do you think? Because this is how you start the culture of thinking. That next time when they have something they want to approach you, they've thought about something already. So that's such a powerful thing. Learn to ask questions. Because you think you are saving time by giving an answer, whereas you are creating a culture of dependency. Because next time whenever they experience something, they're going to run to you. You're going to give them, then when you're not there, what's going to happen?
This is the thing.
So I think leadership it comes with a huge responsibility, because we need to develop, not to give or tell. Because when you give or tell, it may appear that you are smart, but as an organization, you are not helping, in terms of moving forward. Because when you're not there, you have created people who are just taking orders and people who sit there and they cannot think for themselves, because we're just so powerful. And to make anything happen, we need to inculcate the culture of curiosity. We've got to be curious, like reconnect with children in us. Because our world, like you said as well, has beaten down to death curiosity. Now we just have to tell, shut up. Schools have trained us to memorize for tests and exams. But now you found someone who is highly educated or highly qualified, as it were. But when you talk to them, you're just talking textbook stuff. They don't reason. Now, Professor so-and-so said, but what do you say? Their voices are never heard, because schools are just pushing the curriculum. It's very unfortunate and sad. But at the end of the day, you've got people who are unemployed, but they cannot think. They've got all the qualifications, but when you start asking them how creative they are, they're not. So those are the things, I think, for me, that we look at. And when you look at leaders, what are the leadership challenges that you are faced with today?
I think the biggest challenge is the volatility and uncertainty and the complexity with which we are having to navigate the world of work and life. I think that there are no long-term strategies that can be built anymore. These even year plans, 2-year plans, 3-year plans, 5-year strategies, because the world is changing at such a rapid rate that whatever you do now is going to be outdated. I think AI, the impact of how we need to automate, the rate at which we're needing to satisfy clients, customers' needs at its instant gratification is putting a lot of pressure on leaders to find ways to pivot, to be quick and flexible and nimble. Leaders are sitting with a lot of anxiety, a lot of worry about the future. We don't know when the next pandemic is going to hit us. We don't know the next time that we're going to be affected by socioeconomic unrest, like we saw in the riots that took place in KZN. So we're sitting with all of those contentious factors that we have to constantly think about and still show up and still be engaged and there to listen. And I think all of that puts a lot of pressure on a leader. And I think that is why we're seeing burnout, we're seeing depression, we're seeing unhealthy choices made in life. We're seeing parents that are absent from their children's lives. It's because the pressure is mounting and we don't have enough of that middle management to help senior leaders. Our middle management is lacking. in many organizations because we haven't empowered them enough. Leaders have held onto the reins too tightly. They haven't brought up that middle management, which makes up the bulk of our leadership structures, to really step in. My biggest concern with my team is that should I be knocked by a bus, that everything comes to a halt.
Touch wood.
Because then I have failed as a leader. If everything comes to a halt, then I haven't done what I needed to do as a leader. I need to be so indispensable that people can just take over and run with it, because then I've actually done what I needed to do as a leader. So I think as an organization, as many organizations, that investment in middle management, so that your leaders can be allowed to think, strategize, focus on other things, and take care of themselves, because these are the people you're looking to.
Yes.
If you beef those levels up, and as leaders, if we can make peace with the fact that we don't have to have all the answers. We don't always have to know what to do next, because we're dealing with uncertainty.
Yes.
More minds, more brains in the room, more people to think in a psychologically safe space is what's going to take us forward, not one person making a decision.
Wow. You've just mentioned something that's very important, and I think this is something that has not really been happening as much as it does now. The speed at which things are changing and are happening, I mean, that's quite worrying. And when you look at leaders that are stepping in, what did you say? I know one of them being agility, of course. What did you say maybe are the top three, if that much, even four? I mean, there are a number of skills that every leader needs to have right now. They need to be not just worried about them, but they need to keep them on top of mind. They need to be working on them. What is it that you feel that these are a must skills that every leader needs to have, especially during this time? I mean, we're talking about the VUCA world. I mean, it's not getting any better. It's getting worse and worse. So what would you say, maybe from what you've seen, as a leader who is in the middle of these things or in the midst of it, what did you say are the 3 or 4 non-negotiable skills? I know one being agile, being able to be agile and nimble, to be able to be flexible, to move around with things, to adapt. What else that comes to mind?
To add to exactly that, which is, I think, such an important skill and capability to develop, is human connection. Being able to connect, to be able to understand human behavior, to understand your team, to understand who is under stress right now and what do I need to do to best serve them. Who is ready for stretching? Who do I put on this project because I know their skills, capability, and their threshold for stress? How am I able to place people within my team or organization in such a way that they are being the best versions of themselves? Yes. So I think understanding human behavior and being able to connect with that is very important. Understanding where the gaps are and being able to really look at it and say, okay, if this is what it's going to take, we're actually going to slow down. We're going to plan first and do proper planning before we go into execution. I think is very important. So being able to discern from a judgment perspective, what is a short-term, what is a long-term goal, and what is the sustainability I need to get me to that point. So I think competence from that perspective, to have future thinking, to understand that your environment is so unstructured that you have to be able to read patterns, trends, to have that kind of critical reasoning. It's very important. The third thing I think is not so much innovation and creative thinking, but reinvention. You don't always have to throw the baby out with the bathwater to change something.
Yes.
Sometimes all you need to do is make a tweak to something that's already working very well, and it already changes a process or a practice or comes up with a new product. So I think reinvention is incredibly important. Being able to recognize what is working and what is not working, and then just making that tweak. Because sometimes we think we need to always come up with a new product or a new service offering or change practices, policies in order to do it, which is often long-term things. Sometimes just something small, testing it, seeing how it performs, very important. So I think reinvention as opposed to creativity and innovation, coupled with that, is important. And then I think the last thing, if I could add a fourth one in terms of a capability or a skill or a competence, is being and adopting the mindset that we all are still learning.
Yeah.
And that this is
Work
a
in
journey.
progress.
We're work in progress. We're all work in progress. So we don't have to have it all figured out. But we need to be open to see, read the signs, look at what's happening around us, understand what the world is doing. And the only way you do that is when you adopt a learning mindset.
Absolutely. And just two things as well, maybe that I can add. Like self-awareness is very key. And I think as a leader, you need to be very much self-aware, of your capabilities. And also that acceptance that you don't have all the answers. And then number two, self-confidence. Because when you look at all these things, for you to be able to listen to others, for you to be able to acknowledge that I don't have all the answers, it's self-confidence at play. So at the core, you need to be having that self-confidence, because it's not a zero-sum game, that we are playing, that if I win, you lose. No. It can be a win-win situation, but it's a question of how can I be better. So that's why perspectives are very important, to understand that when someone brings something, I normally say to teams and leaders that I deal with, whenever someone brings a different perspective to you or a different point of view, don't be defensive. Different does not mean opposing. So different must actually challenge you to say, wow, this is an opportunity for me to learn. So it must be able to challenge to say, see it as an opportunity and say, wow, get curious. Wow, where do you come from with that? What's the source? Get curious. Don't be defensive. So that's something that's very important that I always emphasize when you talk about that, because the brain gets stimulated by us asking questions, the power of asking questions. Because when you're asking a question, and normally people say, one of the myths in neuroscience, you've heard of it, we talk the game, it says we use about 10% of the brain. And that is a myth. That neuroscientifically speaking has not been proven. Because why? The brain, even if you're idling, you're not really thinking about much. The brain is forever working because it switches from two different networks. You've got the task positive network that deals with facts, that deals with logic. But then you've got another one which is called the default mode network. So the default mode network is the one where creativity comes in, because creativity does not come when you are focused. But these are the shower moments. What happens in the shower? You are relaxed. You feel a bit safe. You're not thinking about washing, but your mind is just wandering. So that's what you're talking about. You are now engaging that default mode network. So it means that's where now different brain regions are connecting with each other. And that's when you are pulling different things from, and this is where now innovation comes in. So these are things that I found to be very important as leaders, to understand that we are work in progress. And all the time, self-confidence is very key, because most people are driven by ego. Because they want to show this face that, no, as a leader, I'm promoted because I know everything. It's not that. It's about bringing out the best in people. But how to bring out the best in people if you don't know what drives them? Yes. So it comes back to that issue to say, are you placing the right people? You're talking about the issue of placing the right people in the bus and making sure that those people are correctly seated. It's not just about having the right employees, but are they, correctly allocated to their roles? Because that's very important, because it minimizes stress as well. And maybe as we move towards the close, I just want to ask a question in terms of, if, for an example, you were to have that magic wand, to choose 3 leaders, dead or alive, that you'll have some lunch with, individually. Who were those, and why would you choose those specific people that have influenced you, or when you looked at their thinking and how they do things, you said, wow, this one, I would really love to have a sit down with that leader. Dead or alive. Sit down with that person. Who would those people be for you?
It's a beautiful question. The first person who comes to mind is Indra Nooyi, who is the ex-PepsiCo CEO of India. Very formidable leader, and someone who has overcome many stereotypes about Indian women in leadership, especially in a country like India.
Wow.
Who also had a family and has gone on to serve on many boards. I would love to have spent time with her. Maybe I can still, who knows? But
Definitely,
yes.
still alive.
Yes.
I think. And what will be the illuminating question that you would be asking her, for an example? Just one or so. I mean, to say, because there's something unique about, them.
If she could do anything differently, what would it be?
Wow.
Because to me, she's achieved it all.
Yes.
So, but I'm sure by her own high standards, given that she's such a high achiever, there would be something, and I'd be interested to hear. What would that be?
I love that. Okay.
What would that be? I definitely think that, and I know this is a very famous leader, but I have so much of awe for our ex-president Nelson Mandela. And my question to him in that would be, in those years that you sat in solitude, because there is nothing like confronting yourself than being 27 years by yourself,
Jeez.
forced to be by yourself.
Yes.
You can't not confront yourself in that time. What were his insights? What were his revelations? How did he make peace with certain things within him that allowed him to come back into society so solid and calm and loving and compassionate?
Oof.
That blows my mind. That really blows my mind, especially given the atrocities that he experienced.
Yeah.
Not knowing what was happening with his family. How did he reconcile all of that? So, yes. Absolutely would love to have spent time
And
with
I came
him.
across these words recently. They say, some storms don't come to destroy us, but they come to create more path for us. I said, wow. That's it. So everyone is trying to avoid storms, but know that some storms don't just come to destroy you, but to make path, to create a path for you. And I thought, so I'm just thinking of that as a question to say Nelson Mandela was sitting there. It was like a storm, a deadly storm, but he didn't see it that way. So faith is something else as well that comes. Maybe the last leader or someone that comes
The
to
last
mind?
leader, and this is someone who has always been someone I looked up to even as a child, and was often conversations at dinner tables and family gatherings, would be Mahatma Gandhi.
Yeah.
I think his humility, his sense of being selfless, really puts me in a state of absolute amazement that someone like him could be so driven with a cause and do it in such a way that it was non-violence.
Yes.
He still got a powerful message across and changed the world for so many people, but did it in a non-violent way. I would love to have had that opportunity.
Wow, I love it.
Sure,
Mahatma Gandhi, he said some beautiful words. Some of them is, always stand guard at the door of your mind. Don't let any man trample on your mind with his dirty feet. I love that. Yes, those are the beautiful words. And he came and he said as well to say, be that change that you want to see in the world.
Absolutely.
And was he not that change? He was. So I think on that one, wow, I would like to ask you our last question.
Yes.
It's been such a beautiful, time. And if you're not really enjoying this, if you are not seeing this as a masterclass, I don't know really what's going to change you, because this is something that is awesome. We have a great mind here, the name of Shervarni Govender. And when you look at this, Shervarni, now if they say you've reached the end of your life, what is it that you'd like to be remembered for? What would your legacy be?
That I left people better than I found them. That I carried myself with integrity and character. That I owned up to my mistakes, and that I allowed others to do the same. And that they felt seen. Yeah.
Wow. And there's a model I call the Shav model. Shervarni, you are just so strong and so powerful. And I'm just so glad that our paths crossed and you are here. And when you talk about being seen, it's actually one of the core human needs. To be seen, to be heard, to be understood, and to be valued. And these are some of the models that I get to share when I talk about the neuroscience of things with different leaders and teams, to say, whenever you engage with someone, when they leave your side, did they feel seen? Did they feel heard? Did they feel understood? And did they feel valued? Because that's an ultimate test for how we influence people. Because did we encourage them to come back next time and interact with us, or did we drive them away? That's what effective leadership is all about. It's about being aware of these things. Whenever you sit down at home after work and you reflect and say, how did my day go? How much of my time did I spend leading? And how much of it did I spend managing? Because people don't understand the difference between the two. They are forever in this management mode, and they never get to lead. Leading is more about influence, but management is more about control. We spoke about the issue of control, where people are always looking at the boxes. Is this done, yes or no? It's about ticking or not, or crossing the boxes. But that's not what leadership is about. Yes, getting things done is important, but how do we encourage people's well-being? That's something that started way back. I mean, like Aristotle, over 2,000 years ago. So when we talk about how the human brain works, it's something that's very important. So I think for me, as an effective leader, you need to understand, like Theodore Roosevelt said, human nature is the most important subject to understand if you truly want to be an effective leader. So, Shervarni, thank you very much. Maybe as the last way to part, to end this podcast, what would you like to leave our viewers and our listeners with? What sort of advice, what words of advice that will remember you by and said, wow, she closed it off in style? What would you like to say? What would you like to leave them with?
I think we have a responsibility as leaders who have been entrusted with taking care of people to do it with compassion and kindness. And I think that we must, in our endeavors to do that, make peace with the fact that we are already in the position. There's nothing to prove. So let's let go of that need for the ego and the power and to show who's the boss. And let's recognize that it is far more about serving those in your care than it is about confirming to them that you're still the one who needs to lead. I don't think we need that anymore. And lastly, I'd say that the greatest gift you can give someone is the ability and the freedom to think for themselves. And I think we should always be encouraging that, whether it's with our children, our partners, or in the world of work. Thinking for yourself is by far, for me, the most important thing that is going to help us deal with the challenges that we currently face. Thank you.
Wow. Wow. That's now closing it in style. Thank you so very kindly, Shervarni, for coming through. Wow.
Thank you.
What a time. And I'm sure our viewers and our listeners are spoiled, with this information. And I think with us having a conversation like this, we need to increase the volume, as I always say, because we are competing with social media. We are competing with all the things that are dumping all the information that we don't actually need. They increase our stress levels. That information increases our anxiety levels. They increase depression because we always feel that we are less than. So the less time you spend in consuming, this information, the better for you. This is the stuff that you need to listen to in order for yourself to be sane, in order for yourself to reclaim the power and the greatness that you have, in yourself as a listener and as someone who's viewing this podcast, because all of us have greatness. Because until you claim that greatness, it will never come to pass. So we have that responsibility to claim our lives and to claim our greatness, because the world will not remember what we said, but it will remember what we did. And the people that you are entrusted to lead them with care, lead them with dignity, and lead them with respect. Because when you do that, you are now creating a new breed of leaders. Because when you do that, leaders are going to be more and more for the future. And there will be more examples of these leaders. So you have the power to live your dreams. And once again, when you talk about the neuroscience of effective leadership, we're talking about how we can be able to leverage neuroscience and all the latest discoveries to understand how we work with ourselves, because you cannot fix the car until you understand the different components. So understanding what makes the brain, this brain that we're talking about here, what is it that really drives this thing, and how does it influence each other? How are the chemicals released to influence our behavior? That's something that's very important. And on that note, Shervarni, once again, thank you so very kindly.
Thank you.
It's been such a wonderful
wonderful
time
to be here with you.
And I'm just so glad that you came through. This is something that was worth for us to connect again and for our viewers as well to learn as much as they possibly can, in terms of how to become a leader, and an effective leader at that. Not just talking about theory, talking about the practical stuff. And really, I would like to thank you so very
You're so
kindly.
welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
for the
Thank you. I
opportunity.
really appreciate that.
You have just watched the latest episode of the NeuroEngineering podcast for leaders with Veli Ndaba, the NeuroEngineer, where we transform leaders from leadership darkness to leadership light. To engage us further on our services, keynotes, workshops, coaching, and merchandise, visit our website, velindaba.com. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share this episode.